Over the past few days, I've been completing a lot of research, and I realized how important it is to actually be connected and have some feel within your own research. We have all been in a class before where the teacher is either assigned us a project or an assignment, and all we have to do is research it, and then later on we just kind of forget about it. I've spent countless hours completing research and digging beyond the surface to ensure that I am provided with as much information as I possibly can have. By the end of this presentation, I hope you will understand my personal connection to my research context and how I collected and made sense of my data. I will begin by explaining my overall context, then explaining my data collection procedure, and lastly explaining how my data was analyzed. I will now explain the overall context case of my project. Nonverbal communication within a relationship can be something that is very confusing to discuss and interpret. How do we better understand nonverbal communication within romantic relationships? How do we pick body language? How do we pick up on body language, hand gestures, and facial expressions when speaking with a significant other? These are some of the questions that kind of circle my overall project, and these are some of the main questions that I'm going to need to answer when collecting data through the interviews. We have all been in a situation where we're either with a friend or significant other, and they give us either a nonverbal cue or a message that we do not understand. For example, I went on a date one time when I was in high school with a girl who I didn't really know that well. It was the first date, and the whole time she kept rolling her eyes at me, and I thought that she was upset or bothered by something that I had said, when in fact it was just her way of, joking or messing around, more of a sarcastic eye roll. My participants are going to be all three white males who are currently in straight romantic relationships. These participants must also be 18 to 24 years of age. I will also be including myself as the fourth participant, considering the fact that I match the protocol of being a straight white male who is 18 to 24 years of age. I will now explain the data collection procedure. The data will be collected through interviews that contain questions on how they deal with understanding and interpreting nonverbal communications while in a relationship. We have all been collecting data before, but collecting data through interviews can be very effective. We have all collected data through online documents or through online journals, but I believe that collecting data through personal interviews is mostly the most effective way. The type of data that I collected is qualitative through research and protocol interviews. Most of the data that I've collected has been through online journals, through the ULR library database, and then through interviews that I will be finishing up by the end of next week. I will be collecting through the data through interviews of three different males who are in straight romantic relationships. All three of these participants will match the interview protocol that was in my research protocol document. I will now explain how the data will be analyzed. I will make sense of my data by dividing it up into categories based on different nonverbal cues, gender, and relationship status. I will take the data that is given to me and put it into different categories based on their appropriateness to maximize their effectiveness. This is going to be really important in my final project as far as dividing and interpreting the information that's being given to me, because obviously with the interviews that we've been given, there's going to be a lot of information that's coming in, and I'm going to need to be able to divide it up effectively. We have all collected data before and been unsure of how to organize it in order to maximize its effectiveness. This can be something that can be very difficult as far as when you are receiving a lot of information from your interviews. It can be difficult to sort of organize all the information that's coming in. That's why it's very important that for me to sort of organize it into different groups. The data will be divided up based on the area of kinesics it is covering. So, for example, some of my data will cover facial expressions. Some of it will cover whole body movements. Some of it will cover hand motions. So these are sort of the different categories that I'm talking about as far as dividing up the information that's going to be given to me within the interviews. I'll also be dividing my data into different categories based on the length of the relationship that we are discussing between me and the interviewee. Some of my participants will be in a relationship that has lasted much longer than others. Some people may be wondering why I'm doing this, but I believe that this is a very important piece that will really impact the data. For example, someone who has only been dating for 2 months is going to have very different gestures, I believe, than someone who's been dating for possibly 2 years. I hope by now you can understand my personal connection to my research context and how I collected and made sense of my data. I've discussed with you my overall case context, then explained my data collection procedure, and lastly explained how my data was analyzed. This research that I have completed is something that I have put forth a lot of effort and time into, and this topic is something that I'm very passionate about, and something that I look forward to completing my interviews to get some really valuable information for my final project.